Hi, my name is Morgan and I'm a neuroscientist, which is usually what this channel is about. Usually it's me talking about different neuroscience concepts or different issues within science, but in addition to being a neuroscientist, I am also a college professor. And so I made this video to help my students, and I thought it could be a resource for students outside of my class as well. And so that's what this video is, and I wanted to make sure that I put this disclaimer up front because I'm going to say some stuff in it that might be specific to my class. So if you have any questions or there's any discrepancies between what I say and what maybe your professor says, always check in with your professor over what I say here, unless I am your professor. In that case, what I say is right. And if you are a fellow educator, please feel free to share this resource with your students. It's meant to help the students everywhere. Hi, and welcome to Public Speaking 101, How to Give a Scientific Presentation. So this is meant to be a resource to help you give either scientific presentations in your class or to give research presentations to a broader scientific audience. To demonstrate this, I thought there's no better way to show you how to make a presentation than to make one myself. So I will actually be assembling the PowerPoint that I'm going to use for this video in this video. So the first step to making a good presentation is to have a presentation outline. Now, you don't necessarily need a formalized outline like this where it's like officially set up with bullet points. It could be a sticky note that you put your thoughts down on, but you should have some way to organize your thoughts, especially sort of what order you want to talk about things in and what you want to be on specific slides. So I'm going to work with this Public Speaking 101 outline. I'm going to have it over here on this computer, and we're going to start assembling our presentation. So if you are using I'm going to be doing this in PowerPoint. You can also use Keynote or whatever sort of PowerPoint analog that you want to use. If you are giving a scientific talk to a scientific audience, like at a conference or even maybe a lab meeting in a very scientific setting, in a very academic setting, you might say, in a very serious setting, you're going to want to use the blank presentation, and you're going to want to keep it very boring. But this is for a video and to help my students who are going to be giving a presentation in my class, which I do hope that they take seriously, but it doesn't have to be super duper formal. And so because of that, we're going to use a fun outline that Office has for us. The first thing we're going to do is get rid of all of this extra garbage that it gives us whenever we open up that presentation. And we're going to give our presentation a name, Public Speaking 101. Now, normally you would not start with an outline slide, but because I want to sort of be able to put up timestamps and I want you to know the direction that I'm going with this video, I'm going to make an outline slide. We will actually talk about when to use an outline slide and how to use an outline slide a little bit later on. But in this video, we're going to be talking about why public speaking is important, what makes a good talk, how to design your slides, organizing your slides, and that includes talking about outline slides, organizing things for a group presentation, and what I call the upside down pyramid. Then we'll talk about something that I'm going to call how to use your slides as notes. I think it's pretty universally recognized that the best talks are ones where the presenter is not looking at their notes, and maybe even where the presenter doesn't even have notes on them, but that can be very intimidating for students and people who are just not getting into public speaking. So I'm going to explain how to set up your slides so that they serve as your note cards. when speakers are giving these presentations without notes, it's not that they don't need notes or that they don't need little reminders, it's that they know how to set up their slides to be their notes, so they don't have to be holding note cards at the same time. This is going to include also keeping track of which slide is coming up next, which I know a lot of people struggle with, and that's sort of one of the main arguments for using notes. We're going to talk about tips for handling your nerves, including what I call my no eye contact, eye contact trick. And then lastly, we're going to talk about good ways to practice public speaking. So following with our outline, the first slide, like our first true presentation slide, is going to be why is public speaking important? There's a few reasons why public speaking is important. Number one, jobs. Number two, educating the public. Number three, people have questions. And number five, it builds confidence. Now I want you to notice that whenever I made this slide, those are just keywords. One of the worst things that you can do in a presentation is have a slide that is just full of text. So I just have 4 key points here. I don't have just this wall of text explaining why public speaking may or may not be important. And to add interest, I'm actually going to pull up some photos. Let's look for a photo of, let's just search what comes up whenever I do public speaking. From images, let's have a talk here. And so now, yes, I'll be the first one to admit these are not high quality images. And if I wasn't doing this on the fly, I would spend more time searching for some higher quality images. But what we have here are things that draw attention. What we have is not a giant wall of text. And I'll talk about the importance of that later whenever we get to how to make your slides. But for now, why might public speaking be important? Number one, a lot of jobs require some form of public speaking. And you might think, not the one that I'm going to go into. That's what a lot of people think before they go into STEM fields. A lot of people think that scientists are very introverted, and so being in science must not involve very much public speaking, but that's very much not the case. We are constantly, if you are like a research scientist, your main job is doing research, we are constantly giving presentations at conferences, which can be to from like 100 to 1,000 people. We're giving presentations in front of politicians to talk about science policy. We are giving talks to our lab, which is maybe just 4 or 5 people, but that is still a form of public speaking. Many researchers and scientists are also educators in some form, including professors. A professor's entire job is public speaking. Even if you decide to go into industry where there's a lot less of this going to conferences and presenting your research, you're going to have to present to investors. You're going to have to present to people who might have hired you as a consultant. So most jobs within the realm of science involve some aspect of public speaking. Even if we want to talk about medical doctors are not often presenting to large rooms full of people, but you might be presenting to a room full of a patient's family. That could be 10 or 20 people, depending on how many people they have brought into their room with them. You'll be presenting to attendings whenever you're doing your rounds, which is going to involve presenting in front of 10-ish people. You're going to be giving presentations maybe at board meetings for your hospital. So there's truly no field that is without a some form of public speaking. And so it's a necessary skill to develop. In my opinion, one reason why public speaking is important is also to educate the public. So science has often sort of presented itself as a very closed off from the public, and it took a long time for us to want to share science with the public. But the public have questions. They want to know about your research. They want to know about science. They want to understand how their body works. And they want to know things. And so it's important that we spend some of our time educating the public and talking to the public. And that's going to involve things like giving presentations and doing some amount of speaking to large groups of people. And then finally, learning how to do some form of public speaking can build confidence. Because once again, you may not be presenting to a huge room of like 100 or 1,000 people, but many people struggle to even talk and give their own thoughts and opinions in front of a group of like 4 or 5 people. And so learning to present with confidence, to have faith in your ability to speak and your ability to get your point across, can really be important in building some amount of confidence in your ability to participate within a group, which is extremely important in STEM, which is extremely collaborative, where again, we're working with other labs, we're working with people from other countries, we're working with people we met at a conference. We're constantly working within these groups, and we need to be able to speak our own professional thoughts and opinions to these groups. And lastly, if I still have not convinced you that public speaking is important, it's important because my class requires it. So you do need to learn how to do some public speaking, bare minimum for my class. So let's talk about what makes a good talk. How do we give a good presentation? So what makes a good talk? I just want to mention real fast that I know I'm sort of going through like creating new slides and inserting images and things like that. This is not a how to use PowerPoint video. If you have questions about how to do things like insert images and change the font and things like that, that's very easily found on the internet. If you just search how to change the font on a PowerPoint or how to insert an image in PowerPoint, you can look those things up pretty easily. So the focus of this is the general overall concept of creating a presentation, not so much the nitty-gritty of how to use PowerPoint. So what are things that make a good talk? I think most people can agree that a good talk keeps people's attention. But in addition to keeping someone's attention, we also need to be able to draw people in and give people an opportunity to tune back in. Even the best public speakers in the entire world who are excellent orators and great at keeping people's attention, there's going to be at least one person in the crowd who you cannot keep their attention. Their attention is wandering for whatever reason. Maybe a baby is crying, maybe they have other things going on in their life. People are going to get distracted during your talk. And that's one of the reasons why titles are very important. If someone has not been paying attention to this video at all, not calling you out if that's you, you can look at this slide very easily and know I'm talking about what makes a good talk. If I were on this slide, you know, okay, this is about why is public speaking important. So even if you weren't listening in the beginning when I said that this was Public Speaking 101, you weren't listening when we did the outline, you weren't listening when I was talking about public speaking and why it's important, you know what I'm talking about now. I've given you the opportunity to tune back in. Even if you aren't familiar with what's been going on, you can come back. If you don't give people this opportunity to tune back in, they're just going to continue to tune you out. So you need to give them opportunities to come back to you throughout the talk, in addition to just doing your best to keep their attention. But how do we keep someone's attention? Number one, we are relatable. This could be things like telling a story, telling an anecdote at the beginning, taking a second to explain why your topic is important. I've even seen people do things like clap very loudly at the beginning of the presentation or shout sex really loud. I don't recommend those methods. I think they're a little cheesy and they can really go one direction or another. But you need to give people something that immediately piques their interest, that is going to get most people's attention. And usually the way to do that is to give them something relatable. Relate what you're doing back to them. So why does this matter? I'm relating what I'm doing to you specifically, not just talking about it in general. Great talks also have a certain tone of voice, and this can be very difficult for people to understand or identify. There is a certain tone of voice that is clearly nervous and not confident. That's going to be things like being very quiet or very loud. People who are extremely loud or extremely quiet, most people can tell, okay, you're very nervous, you're not super confident in the things that you're saying. And especially the being very loud will really off-put a lot of people and really struggle to keep someone's attention. So you want to have just the right volume where the people in the back of the crowd can hear you, but the people in the hallway can't hear you. So that's sort of the volume that we're aiming for. If you're at an event that gives you a microphone, then the volume that you're aiming for is your normal speaking volume, as if you were talking to someone who's directly across from you. If you were talking to someone sort of standing within a group, how loud would you talk to be able to get the person across from you to hear you? That's what you're aiming for if you have a microphone. If you don't have a microphone, you want to project enough that the person in the back of the room can hear you, but people in the hallway can't. You also don't want to sound over practiced. This means sounding like you are sticking to a particular script. A great way to avoid this is to practice your talk using different words. I really don't encourage people to write scripts. I encourage things like outlines and bullet point notes where people know the points that they want to hit. But if people can clearly tell that you're following a script, one, it really makes them struggle to pay attention because it can feel like you're on autopilot, like you aren't paying attention to your talk, and so why should other people pay attention to your talk? It can also result in a very flat voice, a very monotone voice if you're following a script, and so that just sort of puts people to sleep. It doesn't really get them invested in your talk. And it's just off-putting to a lot of people in a way that, okay, you had to have a script, you didn't really understand the things that you were talking about, and so you had to have a script because you didn't know what you were talking about. So it's important to practice, but not to sound over-practiced. Projecting confidence is a big one. You may have noticed that in several of the things that I've said here. And notice that I said projecting confidence and not necessarily being confident. Most people who are giving a public presentation have some sort of insecurity, something that they're worried about, a question they're worried that the crowd will ask. There's not many people who are 1000% confident in their presentation, but you have to project this confidence and this assurity that you know the topic that you're speaking about. Because if you don't believe in the words that you're saying, why should someone else believe in them? If you don't think that what you're saying is accurate or important, then why should someone else think that? So it's important that you are sort of projecting this level of confidence. An appropriate level, you don't want to seem cocky or unapproachable, but you do want to seem like you know what you are talking about. Some form of crowd interaction will typically go well. This doesn't have to be asking them a question. You could ask the crowd a question. That is kind of mixed. Sometimes the crowd doesn't respond. Sometimes they don't respond the way that you expect them to. It's a bit of a risky move. So a crowd interaction doesn't always have to be that. It could be a asking them to clap for the last speaker. It could be sort of asking for a thumbs up or down on if they understand a topic that you said. It could even just be like oh, I saw someone laughing. And that sort of also adds to the relatability of like, oh, you guys think this is funny. I also think it's funny. In that vein, telling a joke. saying something that relates to the crowd. Like, for example, if you're giving a presentation, saying something about how having to give a presentation sucks, or how you're really stressed about giving the presentation. My research was on stress, and so something I used a lot was if you're really stressed, like I was last night when I was practicing this, things like that. So it doesn't have to be directly interacting with the crowd, but in some way making the crowd feel involved in the talk. And then the last thing that I would say makes a good talk, or maybe even is just the sign of a good talk, is leaving people with a takeaway, point, or question. So when someone leaves your talk, if someone asks them, hey, what was that talk about? They should be able to answer with a few words of what the talk was about. For example, at the end of this video, I hope that you're able to say, oh, that was a great video on how to give a presentation. Or you might want to leave someone with a question. For example, if you're doing a presentation on the importance of recycling, you might want someone to leave your talk with the question of, okay, how do I implement this aspect of recycling in my everyday life? So you want to leave people with something, either some new knowledge that they've learned or a new thing that they want to look into. These are sort of the aspects that you want to bring together to make a good talk. But these are all kind of very general points. So let's talk about some specifics of how to make a good PowerPoint and how to make a good presentation. So let's talk first about how to design your slides. And first, we're going to talk about creating a single slide, and then overall slide organization. So the number one thing on creating one slide is to not have too many words. This is the number one thing that people are always doing, and people will also sort of swing the other direction, and you want to have some words. So there are some people who will swing the opposite direction of like, okay, don't have too many words. I'm gonna have a slide that only has a picture. So if we go back to this like, why is public speaking important slide, what I could have done if I wanted to swing the opposite direction and not have too many words, and I just went, I'm not gonna have any words. What I could have done was just this, just blow the picture up super big, there's no words. That means I have no risk of having too many words because there's none. The problem with a slide like this is that it doesn't give people that opportunity to tune in. If someone just now walked into my talk or just now sort of tuned back in, zoned back into whatever's happening, they would not know what I am talking about. They wouldn't be able to join this conversation if I had absolutely no words. So you need a balance between no words and too many words. So if we go back and sort of look at this initial slide that I made, we have some pictures to draw an interest. We don't have very many words, we just have our key words. So instead of saying many jobs require public speaking, for example, researchers have to present their work at conferences, and professors are always presenting to large classes, and even medical doctors have to present to attendings and other medical students and patients' families. So in addition to that just being a run-on sentence, this is way overwhelming to look at compared to just jobs, or even jobs require it. Looks significantly better than this huge paragraph. And so this paragraph is very overwhelming to look at, which can tie back into that whole drawing people in and giving them a chance to tune in. This is scary to look at. People aren't going to want to tune in if they see this giant paragraph of text. In addition to that, if I had started it off this way with this giant paragraph, the eye is immediately drawn to the text. And so while I was sitting here saying, hey, let's talk about why public speaking is important, one of the reasons why public speaking is important is because a lot of jobs require it. And while I was saying my words, what you as the listener and the person in the audience would have been doing would be reading this wall of text. So in addition to scaring people and looking ugly, it also draws attention away from the words that you're saying. And ultimately, the words that you're saying are the focus. The slides are meant to support you and as a visual aid. They shouldn't be what people are focused on. So you need to find a balance between too many words and not enough words. Next, you're going to want to add some photos. If you notice the difference between this slide, the what makes a good talk, and why is public speaking important, objectively this one is more interesting. It has pictures, it draws you in, it's more fun to look at. So it's important that we are adding sort of visual elements. You don't have to do it on every slide. For example, there's not a great picture that goes with this slide. Like, I just can't think of something that wouldn't distract from what I'm trying to say. And so maybe this slide didn't need a picture. Maybe to balance this slide out a little bit more, what I actually could have done is gone in and made it columns. And by making it into columns, I've taken up some space. There's not very much white space on the slide, but I didn't have to add in a picture. So that's a good way to balance out the slide. But you're gonna wanna add a picture sometimes. A great presentation is going to have some photos in it. If the photo is of your research, then you can just add the picture in. There's not much that you have to do. If you are stealing the picture from the internet, so let's say that I want to steal this public speaking picture, I copied it, I'm gonna paste it in here. Because I took this from the internet, and this isn't my own picture, I didn't generate this, I didn't make it, I didn't take it, I do need to cite where I got it from. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to where the picture came from. I'm just gonna copy and paste that link on my slide. For most presentations, just sort of adding that link in there and even maybe making the link teeny tiny is enough of a citation to say, hey, I didn't make this picture and here's where you can go if you want to find this picture. It gives proper credit to the source. So most of the time just having that link in there is perfectly fine. If you're citing some scientific research, let's say I wanted to include this research in my presentation. I would copy the picture, paste that picture in there, and then because this is research, and especially if you're giving a research talk, what you actually want to do is properly cite where this came from. So this came from Johnston et al. So I took the first author of the paper and then added et al. Because there's a lot of people in there. Et al. And then what journal it's from? It's from Neuropsychopharmacology. And the year 2025. So the purpose of this citation is to give someone enough information that if they wanted to look at the research themselves, they could. And so that's enough information that they should be able to find this article on their own. Some people prefer to have a reference slide. I personally think that having your source right here is the best way to do it. So that people know exactly what figure the citation goes with. So if someone looked at this slide, there's no question of what paper this came from. If I just put a 1 here and then had a reference slide later on, it's going to be a little bit more complicated for people to connect those dots. So I think that this is the best way to cite a picture. So again, if it's just a picture that you found on the internet that you just think is a good visual aid, usually just putting the link underneath it is plenty. if you're citing research, you should put enough information underneath it that someone in the audience could go and find that research for themselves. And then the last thing that we're going to do is properly use animations. Now this is another one, kind of like the not having too many words and having some words, that people tend to go to one extreme or the other on. You can have animations, and if you use them properly, they can enhance your presentation. But if you use them too much or improperly, then they can really take away from your presentation. So for example, if I had just finished up this what makes a good talk slide, and then went to how to design your slides, we have the same issue that we have with that giant paragraph of text, where if I just automatically, when I get to this slide for the very first time, have all of this text on it, people are reading this text and not paying attention to the words that I'm saying. So what I might want to do is create a little animation here so these words pop up individually. Now there's two ways that you can do this. You can use the animation pane in PowerPoint, and like I said, you can look up many tutorials on how to do animations. Actually, what I prefer to do and what I think is much simpler is I just duplicate the slide, and so I'll insert over the text that I have here a little white box. And now if you looked at this slide from far away, you wouldn't see anything here except for the how to design your slides. Now I can take that box, put it on my duplicated one, duplicate that again, allow for some words. Now what we have here is instead of going straight from this slide to this, which can be very overwhelming and again cause people to not pay attention to what you're saying, we go from, okay, these are the aspects that make a good talk. Next, I'm going to talk about how to design your slides. And so there's nothing here that's going to distract you from the words that I say. And so then I say, okay, so I'm going to talk about how to design your slides. The first thing we're going to talk about is creating a single slide. And what we want to think about when we're creating a single slide is not having too many words on the slide, but also having some words. And so you see that the animation actually added to what I was saying. People could read the words as I was saying those same words, and they didn't distract from anything that I was saying. And that's the balance that we're looking for here with these animations, that they prevent distractions from happening. The other real benefit of using animations is that can help slow you down. So I personally am a very fast talker. Having to click the next slide can be the thing that slows me down enough that the audience who's listening to me can understand the words that I'm saying. So this serves a very important purpose. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about with designing your slides is overall slide organization. So between all of these slides that I have, how do I organize those? First thing, let's talk about outline slides, when and how to use them. So outline slides are for talks that are over 30 minutes. If you're going to be giving a talk that is longer than 30 minutes, you want to give people a clear outline of where you're going because they will get distracted. And it's even useful sometimes to revisit your outline slide. So at this point in my talk, people may have forgotten that later we're going to talk about tips for handling your nerves. And so I might finish up my how to design your slides, duplicate this outline slide and put it here again. So when I finish up talking about how to design your slides, we go back to the outline and I go, hey, this is where we are and what we just finished. Where we're going next is how to use your slide as notes, some tips for handling your nerves, and good ways to practice public speaking. So this can be another really useful way to, once again, draw people in and give them an opportunity to tune back in. So if your talk is going to be longer than 30 minutes, I recommend having an outline slide. For group presentations, one thing that people always struggle with is knowing who's going to go next. I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with the experience of watching people give a group presentation and there's this big pause in between two people speaking. So what I recommend for that is having an on deck. So what I would do is here at the bottom of my slide, I would have presenting Morgan, and on deck is John. So this does two very useful things for us. Number one, having the presenter at the bottom of the slide is useful for anyone who's watching the talk to understand who is currently giving the talk. Because I'm sure at the beginning of the talk, you've introduced yourself, everyone in the group introduced themselves. If we do not know you personally, people are going to lose track of who is speaking. And so having the presenter listed at the bottom can be useful for the person watching to know who is currently speaking. And then the second thing that it does is if we have this nice little on deck here, the other group members can see the slide and clearly see their name here and know, okay, when this slide finishes up, it's my turn, and they can be ready to go. And then the last thing that we're going to take into consideration when we're thinking about overall slide organization is what I call the upside down pyramid. Now, this is not like a hard and fast rule, but it is a thing that a lot of researchers will mention whenever they're talking about good slide design. They'll call it different things, but the concept overall is this. So the beginning of your presentation needs to be big picture, super broad. What's the overall thing that we are trying to study? For example, the super broad topic of this is public speaking. That covers a million different things. This is the overarching idea. We're talking about public speaking. Then we're gonna get a little bit narrower. Why should our audience care about this super broad thing? Why should they care? Then what do we currently know about this issue? I know what makes a good talk. These are the things that we currently know about the issue. In science, that's going to look like giving background information. What has the research before us shown? Then we bring up what's the gap in knowledge? What's the thing that we don't know? What's the thing that my presentation, my slides, my thesis, my work is going to fix? What's our big question here? And then over time, we're getting more and more specific. So we've identified a gap in knowledge. What are we doing to fill that gap? What are we doing to answer that question? How is this presentation going to answer that? What's currently being done? What are other researchers currently doing? And then the most narrow, what are our results? What is the specific thing that I found, the specific thing that I'm doing? This should be the overall structure of your slides. We should be getting more and more narrow. And then at the end of our presentation, we bring it back around. So sort of the middle of our presentation should be your middle / towards the end. Should be what are my results or what are my expected results? And then we should work just a little bit to bring that out. It kind of looks a bit more like this, where, okay, so we have started super broad. What's the overall topic? Why should you care about it? What do we currently know? What's our gap in knowledge? What are we doing to fill that gap? What are our expected results? That's the bulk of the presentation. Sort of your conclusion should be bringing things back out. Okay, now that we have this puzzle piece, how did we fill that gap in knowledge? Now that we have this puzzle piece, does it add to what we currently know? Does it impact the reasons why we should care about this? And how does it overall fit back into this super broad thing that we started out with? That should be the overall structure of these slides. Now that we've talked about sort of how to make a good presentation, what are the things that we should put in our slides? What are the things we should be doing? How do we present this? And the number one thing that I'm going to talk about is using your slides as your notes. So if you look back at the slides that I've done, we have very few words, right? The words that we do have here are trigger phrases for me. If I had a note card that I was using for this presentation, on my what makes a good talk note card, if I were to make note cards for this slide, this is what my note card would look like. It would have the title of the slide on it, so I know which slide it goes with, and then it would have keywords that tune me back into what I'm supposed to be saying. These keywords trigger in my brain what I was supposed to say about that topic. If you compare this card, this note card that I made, and my slide, you'll see my slide actually has more details on it than this card does. Meaning that this slide serves as a better note card than my note card does. You can use your slides like your note card. This is especially true whenever we have animations built in. So if I build an animation into this, and then I'm gonna zoom you guys out so that you can see very clearly what I'm doing, because what I'm not doing is over relying on my slides. I'm not going to look at them too much, but I am gonna look at them a little bit, and that's okay. No one has their presentation 100% memorized. That is an unrealistic expectation that no one fits. What I'm going to be doing if I'm giving this talk is we're going to have just ended this slide. Okay, why is public speaking important? So those are all the reasons that I believe public speaking is an important skill to learn. Next, I'm going to talk about what makes a good talk. And things in my mind that make a good talk, number one is going to be being able to keep people's attention. There's a lot of different ways that we can keep someone's attention. Number one, though, is going to be to draw people in. We might tell a story that invites someone to pay attention to us. We might use an anecdote that it relates back to someone's life. We might tell a joke. We're going to do different things that are going to draw people's attention into us. And then we're also going to give people the opportunity to tune back in. It's unrealistic to expect someone to be constantly paying attention to your talk. There's always going to be some sort of external distracting factor that you can't account for that you want to be aware of. So you want to make sure that you're giving people the chance to tune back into your talk. And one of the ways that we can do that is by using very clear titles. And so by using clear titles, people are able to tune back in to what we're saying. So if you notice in the example just then, I have not practiced this. I have been creating this in real time with you. What I did was every once in a while, I glanced at it and I saw those same keywords that I wrote here that tuned me into what I was supposed to be saying. So it's okay to look at your slide every once in a while. What's not okay is to read off your slides. So if instead of doing that, I went, and that's why I think that public speaking is really important. And so the next thing that I'm going to talk about is what makes a good talk. And something that makes a good talk is being able to keep people's attention. And we're able to keep people's attention by drawing them in, and then also by giving them an opportunity to tune back in. See, that was reading off the slides, and it wasn't good. It wasn't entertaining, it wasn't fun. It's also very fast and didn't give a lot of information. We want to be casually glancing back at the slide very quickly. Our main focus should be on the audience, on the things in front of us, but it's okay if we need to look at the slide every once in a while. And extra trick, if you want to do something like sort of sneakily look back at your slide, point at something. The audience knows that you don't have the whole layout of the slide memorized, and so if you go to point at something, they know you have to look to make sure you're pointing at the right thing. But whenever I do that, and whenever I pointed back at what makes a good talk, talking about title slides, I wasn't looking up here. I was looking down here. That was a sneaky opportunity for me to look back at my slides and see what's on my slide whenever I look to point. So there are a lot of ways that you can reference your slides and use your slides as notes without having to have a note card in front of you. And that's what I recommend, because not having notes on you looks a lot more professional. It looks a lot more confident. It looks like you know what you're talking about a lot more when you're still doing the exact same thing as someone with notes. Now, I would say the number one thing that people say sort of in response to what I just said is, but I need the notes to know what slide is coming up next. Like sometimes I forget the order of my slides. And we can still use our slides as notes to understand that. So if we go back to this what makes a good talk slide, up next is how to design your slides. So if I'm looking at this and I am making my slides, I know in the conversation we've established what makes a good talk. If I'm not positive what's going to come next, if I know that this transition is something that I struggle with, what I can do is add a question. And you don't want to overuse this. If you use it on every single slide, it's going to become very obvious. But if you use it sparingly on just the slides that you know you struggle with, this can be very effective. What makes a good talk, then I can do, so how do I design a good talk? And we just incorporate this sort of rhetorical question into our presentation. That looked bad, but we do that. And so if I add in animations here, now I've just finished talking about what makes a good talk. And so I go, so these are the things that make a really good talk. And I see that. We pause for dramatic effect, not because we're reading, it is because we're reading, but we pause for dramatic effect and go, okay, so these are the things that I think makes a good talk. So with knowing that, how do we design a good talk? Well, we design a good talk by designing our slides in this way, blah, 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 blah. So I have now used my slides like a note card to tune me into what's coming up next, to key me into what's coming up next. So now I've used this to be like, it looks like I'm just asking the audience a rhetorical question, like it's a good transition that I built in. But what I've actually done is given me a hint at what the next slide is going to be. So like I said, it's important that we use this sparingly. I would only use it like once or twice a talk. So you add this sort of after you've practiced the talk a few times. And once you've practiced the talk a few times, you'll know sort of which slides you struggle with and which slides you sort of have down. And you use it on the ones that you know you struggle to remember, or that even maybe you are good at remembering what slide comes next, but you're really struggling with remembering your transition. That's where adding this question can be very helpful. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is handling nerves. Public speaking is one of the number one things that people are afraid of. There used to be a stat that said that more people were afraid of public speaking than were afraid of death. I don't know if that still holds true or if it even ever did, but many people are terrified of public speaking. That doesn't mean that you can never do it. Here's a few things that I do to sort of help handle the stress of public speaking. Number one, water bottles are your friend. If you are giving a presentation, I'll move you back again. If you know that whenever you give presentations, your hands get very shaky, or the thing that I personally struggle with is I talk with my hands a lot. You probably noticed that very early on in the video. And so it can be hard for me to keep my hands still, especially when I'm nervous. If I am holding a water bottle, I cannot be moving my hands. I can't be doing it. If my hands are shaking, no, they're not. They're busy holding something. That is the best way to deal with your hands wandering, with your hands shaking, with them doing things that they're not supposed to. Even with them being sweaty, get a cold water bottle. Like, water bottles solve so many problems. If you're bad about speaking too quickly, which I very much am, and I'm very bad about not pausing on slides for as long as I need to, Water bottle. I've given my students time to digest information. I'm sure they are very confused why I'm drinking so much water during class. I'm very well hydrated during lectures because it helps me stop. You can't talk when there's water in your mouth. This is excellent. It's also great during a Q&A section. If you're waiting on people to ask questions, it's a great distraction. So you're not focused on, oh my God, they're not asking me a question. They're not asking anything. They're not saying anything. No, you're busy taking a drink of water. It's not about them. It's about you. Water bottle fixes so many problems. If you sort of have like an extra intense issue with moving, I recommend open water bottle. That way, if you shake too much, you're gonna spill it. You have to stay still. Next, fidget toys in your pockets. This one we need to be careful with. Number one, needs to be a fidget toy that doesn't make a sound. If it makes a sound, if I'm busy clacking during my own presentation, that's going to be very distracting. So we gotta make sure it's one that doesn't make a sound. Second, we gotta make sure it's not going to look inappropriate. If I'm standing here, I have my toy in my pocket, I'm playing with it over here on the side where I'm very clearly not doing anything weird. If you have your hand all the way in your pocket, it's going to look very strange. So you need to be careful with this one, use it sparingly, but it can be helpful. And then number three, no eye contact. Eye contact. I think this is the number one thing that scares people the most is they look out into this crowd of people and they sort of psych themselves out of like, everyone's staring at me. I need to be making eye contact with people, but looking at people scares me. It makes me realize that there's people looking at me. And there's that like age-old advice that you should picture them naked. I don't think that's helpful because personally that just distracts me a lot. Like now I'm having to use brain power to picture them naked instead of to focus on the presentation. What I do is that I don't make eye contact. This can be very helpful. Number one, if the eye contact makes you nervous. Number two, if you're neurodivergent of some type and you really struggle with making eye contact in general, you don't have to make eye contact. I have given so many presentations in my life. I have won speech awards. I have won presentations at conferences. I have given presentations to like 1,000 people. I have a YouTube channel. I give, I'm a professor. I regularly give lectures. Never once have I made eye contact with someone in the crowd. So that's what we're gonna help you with today, is identifying how not to make eye contact. So I apologize again for the quality of these images. They are the first ones that I could come up with. If we have a room that looks like this, where we have students who are sitting down, things that I'm going to be doing. Number one, I'm going to be looking at the back of the room. Back of the room is good because the person here thinks I'm looking at them, the person here thinks I'm looking at them, the person here thinks I'm looking at them, but actually I'm looking back here at the back of the room. So back of the room, very useful. Interesting objects, also very useful. This person has a weird water bottle. If I'm looking at that, she thinks I'm looking at her, this guy thinks I'm looking at him. Looking just barely above someone's head. This person thinks I'm looking at them, this person thinks I'm looking at them. I'm not. Scanning the room can also be very useful for this. So if I'm looking around, I'm just sort of doing a broad sweep of the room, I might look at right here, right above their eye line. Everyone thinks I'm looking at them. I am not. So in this example, we have people standing in the back. This is useful for large presentations or for like if you're presenting to a room full of other medical students, or you're presenting in like sort of a more casual setting. We have a lot of people in the back. Things I'm going to be looking at. Number one, again, above people's heads is always an excellent choice. If I'm looking here, this person thinks I'm looking at them, this person thinks I'm looking at them, that person thinks I'm looking at them. I'm not. I'm looking at the wall. I see, I see a window over here. Windows, extremely useful, but also very distracting. You have to be careful with them. But if I'm looking out there and say I'm standing right here, this person thinks I'm looking at them, this person thinks I'm looking at them, these people might think I'm looking at them. I'm looking at the window. So we find things that are near people to look at. Let's even say this person's wearing a bright pink shirt. That's very noticeable. I might look at that bright pink shirt. This student thinks I'm looking at them, this one thinks I'm looking at them, this one thinks I'm looking at them, that one thinks I'm looking at them, this one thinks I'm looking at them. Lots of people think I'm making eye contact here when I am looking at a shirt. So one great thing is to look at people's hands or things that they're doing. So this person has their hand raised. I can look at that hand. They will still think I'm looking at them. I don't really know the science of how that works, but it's very effective. Something I forgot to mention also, let's say that someone has, okay, let's say I like this girl's braids. I can look at her braids. She thinks I'm looking at her, and this guy in the front thinks I'm looking at him. If we focus in on like sort of specific things, it's very difficult for people to tell the difference between eye contact and just looking at you. These are the things that you should be doing. You don't have to be making eye contact with your audience. You need to be generally looking at other things in the room that aren't your slides. As long as you're doing that, they will think either that you're making eye contact with them, or if they notice you're not making eye contact with them, which is very rare because usually they're looking at your slides, but if they notice that, they'll just think you're looking at someone else in the room. If you look near a person but not at a person, you will fool them 99% of the time. So that is my advice on eye contact. Last but not least, the best, most effective things for nerves is practice. And I know, that sucks. It's what everyone says. I do take issue with the statement, practice makes perfect. My old dance teacher used to say practice makes permanent, and that's a lot more true. If you practice something a particular way a lot of times, that's going to be how you do it every time. That doesn't mean you're doing it perfectly. That means you're doing it the way that you practiced it. But practice is going to help you get over those nerves. Number one, you want to practice your movements. If you're going to be in a room where you are standing or in a room where you're expected to walk around, practice your talk while standing or moving around. Earlier, I mentioned that you don't want to sound over-rehearsed. You want to practice with different words. This is something that one of my old mentors made me do, and it improved my speaking so much, is just run the presentation through several times, consciously not using the same words. Doing your best to avoid the same sort of buzzwords or the exact same phrasing. And that's going to help you not sound over practiced. It's also going to help you more with your casual conversation when you're talking about this. Let's say you're giving a presentation at a conference, someone asks you a question later. It's going to help you be able to respond more organically if you've practiced saying the same information a bunch of different ways. You also want to practice your pacing. If you're doing a presentation that has a time limit on it, you want to make sure that you're not going over that time limit. You also want to make sure that you're not going too fast, which can be a difficult thing to assess in yourself, but you should do your best. You also want to practice the presentation split up. So research on giving presentations has shown that we memorize the beginning and ends of things very well. What we really struggle with is that middle portion. So if I practiced this presentation all the way through, I'd probably really struggle when I got to this how to design your slides because it's in the middle of the presentation. I might get the beginning down really well, I might get the end down really well, but people really struggle with the middle. So a way to sort of get over this effect is to split up your talk. Practice just going over one slide a bunch of times. Then practice just going over a different slide a bunch of times. Now practice going over these two slides together. Then we can add in the how to design your slides. Now, even though this is the middle of our talk, I've made it the end of the talk, so I'm going to remember it better. And so by splitting it up, we're able to sort of make things different. Again, we're able to break through that feeling over-practiced. We're able to memorize our presentation a little bit better, and we're able to remember what we're supposed to be saying. You want to practice with and without notes. Even though I'm the biggest proponent of not using notes during a talk, when I'm initially practicing my talk, I do have a note card. I have a note card and I am practicing it with my notes just so I can get the presentation down. But what's really important is that eventually you have to take that leap and practice it without the note card. If you never practice it without the note card, you're never going to build that confidence that you can do it without the note card. You're going to learn to rely on the note card whether or not you need it. So I give myself 2 or 3 practices with a note card, and then I put it down. Practicing without the note card will also help you learn sort of those difficult transition points that we talked about, when we might need to add in this question because we struggle with our transition. You might want to add in some extra words to your slide to serve as these triggers for you. You'll learn a lot about how comfortable you are with your presentation when you practice it without notes. Lastly, you want to practice in front of people. Especially if you deal with nerves, practicing in front of your friends can be useful. It can be a safe environment to practice your presentation in front of people. This also lets you practice answering questions because your friends can ask you questions. It's a nice low-stake environment. You can answer casually. Practicing in front of your friends really is, in my opinion, the best way to practice a presentation. You could also practice in the classroom. So if you're going to be giving a presentation in a classroom, practice in a classroom if you have access to it. That's going to reduce a lot of the nerves on the day of when you're standing up in front of the class. The context, the situation, it just feels different. So if you have the opportunity to, you should practice in the place where you'll be giving the presentation. And lastly, practice in front of a camera. I'm not sure what it is psychologically, but people get much more stressed in front of a camera than they do in front of people. So practicing in front of a camera can help you get rid of a lot of those nerves, because then whenever you do it in front of people, you know you've been in a worse situation and you survived that. Also, practicing in front of a camera is going to help you with your pacing and knowing when you need notes, because you can watch that back and you can understand which parts you were struggling with, if you were going way too fast, if certain things sounded weird, if you skipped something. It can be very helpful. So these are my key tips on how to give a good presentation. I hope that this has been useful. I hope that it will help you give better presentations, whether it's in class or whether it's at a scientific conference, to medical students, wherever you end up needing to go on your scientific journey. I hope that this helps.